When big tech billionaires are angry with you, you're probably doing something right. Last week, the EU slapped Twitter, or what it likes to be called X, with a €120 million fine. Now, if you've been online recently for the past week, you'll see a lot of misinformation going around about this subject, especially from the billionaire himself, and, of course, those tied to him in the US government. Unfortunately, big tech and US government are more or less the same these days. And the fine that was given to Twitter is really warranted. Now, a lot of people will be saying this is a freedom of speech issue, and this has nothing to do with freedom of speech. The reason why Twitter had gotten the fine was actually because of a transparency issue laid out in the Digital Services Act from the EU. Now, the Digital Services Act covers many criteria. Of course, it also covers free speech, which was not the violation of this particular fine, but I'm sure they're well on their way to earning one of those as well. Now, the Digital Services Act is in place to protect consumers and Europeans, most notably. Twitter violated the transparency issues regarding advertisements and those blue check marks. Now, most of us know that you can buy a blue check mark and look like a verified account. You just have to pay a fee each month, which is misleading. A lot of people using Twitter don't know this and think that the sources are credible when the person is just paying a fee to have that verified check mark. This could lead to a lot of misinformation and people thinking that sources are credible when in fact they're just willing to pay Twitter each month. Along the lines of transparency, they were also fined because of advertisements. Now, advertisements were being posted, but there was no transparency on who was paying for those advertisements and where they were coming from. Now, in order to place ads in Europe, you need to be as transparent as possible, and if the EU asks for that information, you better be willing to give it up. Another piece of information Twitter was not willing to give up was its data. It collects a lot of data, and Europe wanted to give that data to researchers to be able to keep an eye on the platform, and Twitter was not willing to give that up as well. Now, 120 million in the grand scheme of things, especially when it concerns EU fines for the DSA, is quite low. It can go all the way up to 6% of the global revenue of a company. And the thing about the EU can give fines, but also the member states can also put on additional fines if they violate the laws and the regulations in that particular country. This has happened many times with Google. For example, with Gmail. Gmail was providing advertisements in the inbox when it was not supposed to and misleading customers, and therefore France, for example, gave an additional fine to Google. Big tech really hates the EU. And it hates the EU because it holds them accountable. There are a lot of regulations, and they're there to protect the consumer. Now, this may be difficult to believe, especially for those of you living outside the EU, but the EU is there really to protect the consumers and the users of the products. Big tech is not happy because most of big tech is based in the US. But any tech companies have to follow these rules and regulations no matter where they're based. In regards to this particular fine, I think they have 60 days to comply or 90 days to comply to other fines and regulations regarding this particular violation, but we'll see if that goes ahead. I know since the fine has been dropped, there's been a lot of information flying out of Mr. Elon Musk himself regarding freedom of speech. Now, people need to know that EU freedom of speech is very different than US freedom of speech. In the EU, you do have freedom of speech, but you do not have freedom of hate speech and misinformation. You need to back up your facts, and you can't use your freedom of speech to insult others and belittle them based on their race, religion, or even their origins. These regulations are set up to protect people. And this may be hard to believe, especially for billionaires out there, that there are rules in place and everyone must follow them. Otherwise, if they do not comply with these regulations, they could be banned from the EU. Now, there are other countries who've already banned Twitter, most notably China, Russia, And even recently, Brazil had banned Twitter for a short period of time until Twitter was able to get its act together and comply with the Brazilian regulations. Now, I really don't like how all of these tech billionaires are going after the EU and saying it needs to be abolished. The reason why they would like to abolish the EU is because they would like to do deals with each country individually rather than dealing with the huge, powerful EU. And with all the member states together, all 27, they have quite a bit more power when it comes to regulations. Other countries have to listen. There are so many users and consumers, and they can't ignore it. But these tech billionaires want to break the European Union so that way they can control each country individually, because it would be easier to do so. It would be easier to influence elections. It would be easier to bribe their way into being able to use their products the way they want to in those countries. And I'm really thankful that the EU exists and is there to protect us in these ways. Is the EU perfect? No. There are a lot of issues, and most notably chat control. I'm not a fan of the EU government trying to pass something that would read all of my messages and scan all of my data just to protect children. I think there are a lot of measures in Europe that have been passed that aren't positive, but then there are so many that have. And if we look at the global picture of the EU, it's overall been quite successful for us as Europeans. It's very difficult to compare the EU to the US because the EU is not a federal system. Each member state is its own country and has its own laws and regulations, and those laws and regulations also impact big tech. So this is why they really don't like the EU. Not only do they have to comply with the EU itself, but also each individual country in the EU in order to comply with the laws and regulations to be run in those countries. I know for myself, I don't use Twitter, and I don't plan to in the future, so I'm not really impacted by the rage and the misinformation and the fake accounts and everything that's going on with Twitter at this point. And honestly, I wouldn't really care if the EU banned it in the end. But I know a lot of people do rely on Twitter for their jobs, for marketing and things like this. So I'm not going to say just because it doesn't impact me, it doesn't impact other people. It does impact people a lot. And to ban the platform probably would financially impact a lot of people. But if companies like this can't comply with the EU, I don't think they should be operating in the EU. Well, that was a lot of rambling just to say that big tech really hates the EU. And honestly, as someone who hates big tech, good. I'm glad you hate the EU. I don't like you either. And honestly, I think Europe going forward will have to use their own savviness and develop their own tools to be more independent and move away from the big US tech companies. I would really like to thank all of you for supporting the channel, for my members in particular, and thank you so much for watching, and see you soon.